This is the Haulin Assets podcast, where we show you how to start and run your own trucking company. Ever wanted to go out on your own? Follow Chris as he goes through the highs and lows of running on his own authority.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Haulin Assets podcast, episode number 133, a.k.a. the bane of my existence. I'm your host, Craig. Over there, he's Chris.
The bane of your existence.
Well, Chris, we're talking spreadsheets today. Lots and
numbers.
lots of, numbers and spreadsheets.
It's going to be so much fun.
Oh, man. Okay.
We're going to have a good time.
That's the hope anyway. Before we have our good time, that sounded wrong. Somehow that sounded wrong. Everybody needs to go to HaulinAssetsLLC.com. They need to go to MotorCarrierHQ.com. MotorCarrierHQ.com is where you're going to find the tools, the tips, the people that can help you get out on your own if you are looking to do that. Give us a positive review and come find us on Facebook. Whether it's Facebook or HaulinAssetsLLC.com, either way, if there is something you would like us to cover, if you've got a question, if you've got a comment, some experience you'd like to share that you want us to talk about on the show, let us know there. We have taken inspiration from those comments more than once, Chris.
We have, yeah. There's been some good ones.
Yeah, so we want to hear from you guys. Housekeeping-wise, I think that should do it, Chris. So how have things been? How's life on the road?
On the road, it hasn't been. I actually tried to get out on the road today.
Oh, really?
I did. I was actually going to try to take a load today. We don't have a truck available. And a big part of that reason is because truck number 2, if you remember, I think the last episode we talked about, we let one of our drivers go. And that was...
They were on truck 2.
On truck 2.
Okay.
And truck 2 was having... So we took it in to get it detailed, cleaned out, ready for the next driver.
Sure.
And... From, funny story, we go to pick it up and it's derated, which means it won't let it drive more than 5 miles an hour. There's an issue going on. And so we decided, obviously we had to take it into a mechanic to get it looked at. So
what kind of truck is it?
It's a Kenworth.
Okay.
It's the one with a PACCAR engine.
Right.
And the more we have older PACCAR engines, the more frustrated I get with PACCAR. They're so hard to get into a place because remember, PACCAR is the one where you have to go to a dealer. You can't take it anywhere else.
Right.
Nobody else can diagnose them. And anyway, this truck has now been a week at the dealership, and basically they've diagnosed it. And I should have followed up. I don't know what they diagnosed. Nate's talked to the dealership, but they're supposed to get it back in tomorrow to work on it and get it repaired. So anyway, to make a long story short, I couldn't get it fixed. But another funny thing about this whole situation is, so the truck obviously can't drive.
Oh, sure it can.
5 miles an hour. Luckily, so you either, what are our options? We tow it or we drive it 5 miles an hour.
Right, to the dealer.
And it was 3.3 miles. Oh. And so guess what Chris did?
Drove it.
I drove it. at 5 miles an hour, 3.3 miles at like 5 o'clock in the morning when there's no traffic, and I could just kind of drive on the shoulder and get it there. So
I would have liked to see that.
Again. Yeah. Put my podcast in.
That's right.
You got your audiobook.
You got your arm hanging out the window.
Yeah. Just driving early butt crack of dawn in the morning when there's no traffic. So that was lovely.
That must have been quite the picture.
Yeah, me driving trucking again.
Is this how many PACCAR engines do you guys have?
2.
Yeah. And have they both had issues?
New. Yeah, well, we've had 3 because truck number 1 was a PACCAR engine,
right.
Truck number 2 PACCAR, and then truck number 10 is a PACCAR. And 10 is brand new, so it's not having the kind of issues. But
right.
I don't think, honestly, I'd ever buy a used PACCAR again. Not necessarily because there's anything wrong with the engine. It's and not that they break down any more often or anything like that. It's just they're so hard to get into a dealership. and have anything worked on in a timely manner.
And when you're depending on getting out on the road, you can't afford to just sit there.
And where in this situation, we don't really have a driver for that truck anyway, it's not as big of a deal. But you know, if we had a driver and we had to wait that much longer, we'd either be paying the driver to sit to keep the driver happy, or, you know, we'd just be up a creek. Yeah, or taking a driver off. And
so is PACCAR, because I remember seeing them at CES a few years ago, the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas, huge, massive trade show down there that I used to cover for another brand. And I came down the escalator to the main floor, or like the main convention center. And before you got there, like out on the street, PACCAR had this massive, massive booth, half a city block worth of a booth where they were talking about their wares. And I stopped by and kind of just chatted a little bit. I didn't know as much about trucking then as I do now. Chris, I'm so expert. No, but I was talking to the guy, and the way that he talked about it made it sound like, oh yeah, no, we're the luxury brand. We're the BMW. We're the Apple of truck engines. And I didn't think much of it at the time, but as you're talking about this now, it's making me wonder if that is your experience, where it's like, sure, it's a fine machine, it runs great, but the second you run into any trouble, you better come to our store.
Yeah,
it's everything's so proprietary.
And I think they make a good claim, or they pitch that's who they are. Mm-hmm. Their engine's better. It's lighter. It can go longer without needing a rebuild. All these advantages. But in my experience and talking to a lot of people, I think just about any trucking company or driver out there would rather have anything but a PACCAR.
Okay, wow. Strong words.
And it's, again, I don't think the engine's necessarily, I wouldn't, I don't think it's as good as they claim, but it's not necessarily any worse, but it's just getting it into a dealership. That's, downtime is such a big piece of the trucking industry. You avoid it like the plague.
Yeah.
And I guaranteed you're going to have, our experience with our Detroits versus our PACCARs as far as downtime goes, night and day difference. I mean, we can usually have one of our Detroits back in a day or two. And the PACCAR is more like a week plus.
I looked up PACCAR. One of their subsidiaries is in Denmark. Do they do their manufacturing in Europe? Is that the idea?
I don't know the history of PACCAR. I probably should, but I think they actually, I think they originated from Europe, and they've purchased, because PACCAR owns Kenworth and Peterbilt.
Right.
But I think the parent company is actually European based. And so they've run PACCAR engines in Europe for decades. Mm. And they're trying to break into the U.S. market. And
so it is like the Mercedes of...
probably.
Except for Mercedes, which makes great trucks, apparently.
And I'm guessing Mercedes is kind of the same way. You kind of have to take theirs
right
to a dealership. And that business model, I don't like it.
No. Nope. Me neither. I mean, I'm not driving trucks, but you see this in all sorts of other areas in life, and I hate it. I hate it.
It's not my cup of tea.
I don't want, when I buy a product, I'm not joining a cult. Thank you very much. Okay. So it's mine. I want to take it where I want to take it. I want to work with my mechanic. I want to, but
agreed.
So I hate that stuff. Chris, main topic. I kind of teased it as, the bane of my existence, because it's all about spreadsheets. But why don't you lay out for us what you want to talk about as far as load analysis and what brought this up?
So obviously the trucking industry is not doing great, fantastic, fabulous right now. And so it's kind of, I've sat back and I've tried to do some reflecting and some thinking and, hey, what can we do to make things better? And oftentimes you're not going to, there's typically not one like grand slam thing that you're going to do that's going to make a huge difference, but it's a lot of incremental, small, little things that you do combined together that are going to make a big difference in the company. And so one of the things that I decided to do is I wanted to look at our loads and analyze kind of who we've been hauling for and see if I could see some trends and see if I could tell, who are our best brokers and shippers and who are maybe our worst, and see if there's something that I can see with that. And so what I ended up doing is I went into our accounting system, into QuickBooks, and I pulled a revenue report essentially for April, May, and June.
Right.
And in that, I'd get a list of every load that we've done. And I think it was 189, 188, something like that, loads that we've done over those 3 months. And I pulled, out of this report that I pulled, I exported to Excel into a spreadsheet. Yes.
It begins.
It begins. And I pulled the broker's name. I've got the invoice amount. I've got the invoice date. And then I go in and I also add to that for each load, I add the number of loaded miles, the number of deadhead miles, and I create a column for the total miles. And then also I look at the direction of travel. And this is important because, in Utah, reefer-based loads, when you're going out of Utah, typically, obviously, you're going to be going east. Sometimes you'll go either to California, which we don't do a whole lot of, or Portland, and we do that a decent amount.
Yeah.
So any of those outbound loads are typically our best paying loads. And that's not just because of anything specific we're doing, but anything that originates out of Salt Lake, you're typically going to get paid better for than something that's like, for instance, going from Pennsylvania back to Utah. So I categorize the loads as either an outbound load, a load that's moving from the east to the west, which usually are worst paying, and then other. And so the other is typically something that's, north to south, south to north.
Okay.
But you take, for example, if we did a load that went from Salt Lake to Pennsylvania, that would be outbound. And then if we picked up a load from Pennsylvania that took us down to Texas, and then we took another load from Texas back to Utah, I would consider both of those
inbound.
It's
east-west?
East to west, because they're generally east to west. The others would be something more along the lines of if we were in Texas and we went up to Wisconsin.
Right.
So I categorize those three so I could kind of a little bit more finely see, what's happening. Because if one broker we're getting paid worse on, but every last one of those loads is an east to westbound load, that kind of explains why we're not getting as much out of that broker. And then I could also filter and see, from broker A, if it was an outbound or load, what was the rate I was getting outbound loads with them versus what was I getting east to west in comparison with other brokers. And so it allowed me to kind of analyze that.
And it lets you drill down on something that you're pretty sure this is what academics and science is all about, where there's this thing we think we know, we think this is the case, and a lot of people are like, well, yeah, duh, earthworms eat stuff and they poop out dirt. Yeah, we knew that. And the scientist goes, yeah, we thought that, now we know it.
Yeah.
Right. And this is the point of your spreadsheets, right? We think we know what the highest paying loads are, we think we know who our best brokers are, but we want to know for sure.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And the military does the same thing. We call them assumptions. We make assumptions, and we want to turn those assumptions into facts. And that's really what this analysis is doing is, hey, we've got, like you said, we think this broker is our better broker. Is that true or not?
Yeah.
And so all this analysis is really hoping to help us do that. So once I got all kind of that raw data built into my spreadsheet, I did some, spreadsheet wizardry.
Of course you did.
Yeah. And I used, some formulas and stuff so that I could pull out the top broker. So I looked at I looked at all of our shippers, and we only have 2 direct shippers that we'd hauled loads for during that time period. And then the rest were all brokers. And about 8% of our miles, which was lower than I thought it was going to be, were direct shipper miles.
Oh, interesting.
So anyway, I pulled out any broker that we'd hauled more than 4 or more loads for, and I kind of created them their own category where I could look at them on a more detailed basis. And so
you've got more data for them.
I've got more data for them. So what I did then at that point is for all of those brokers that we'd hauled over 4 loads for, and all of our shippers, I calculated the percentage of loads that we hauled for them. Or what percentage of their loads made up our total loads, what percentage of revenue came from them, the percentage of miles that came from them, and then I calculated their loaded rate per mile, their total rate per mile, and so I could look at that all in one easy thing. And then I also then everything else that was left over, those brokers that we'd only hauled less than 4 loads for, most of them were onesies, twosies. I lumped them all into one category and just kind of named it everything else. So you can actually go into the show notes, and I've got that spreadsheet in the show notes, and you can see exactly what it is that I've done. The only tweak that I made to it is I took out all the brokers' names and I just called them like Company 1, Company 2, Company 3. So you're not going to be able to see who the actual brokers and shippers are.
Okay. And Chris, as I understand it, we're ready to look at those results ourselves, right?
Yep.
But before we do, I want to tell everybody about our friends at Merrimack. Do we have a second, Chris?
That's a good time to. Now's a good time to do that.
This is my professional tease. You're gonna have to wait for the results, people, because I've got something important to tell you. And if you listened last week, you know that we have a new advertiser, Merrimack Solutions. Do you own or work for a trucking company that is struggling to grow its fleet? Is finding drivers the biggest obstacle to growth? Then you need to contact Merrimack Solutions. Merrimack Solutions is the missing piece in your recruiting process. It's a relationship-driven company that makes their clients' hiring needs the number one priority. Merrimack Solutions specializes in Facebook advertising for driver recruiting. 96%, Chris, 96% of drivers have a Facebook profile, and 70% of those spend at least 30 minutes on the platform. That's a huge number.
Lot. Yeah.
This is the barrel where the fish swim. Let's go shooting.
And our experience at Haulin Assets is that's really true, because we get a lot of good leads. We're actually using Merrimack right now to try to fill that truck number 2.
Yeah, that's right. So you've used them in the past. You're continuing to use them now. And I know you talked a lot last time about your experience with them, and it seems like they've worked out really well for you.
They have been. Yep.
So it's been financially beneficial for you. Yep. In the long run. But actually, that's a good one to bring up, because the entry-level campaigns that they do start at $1,000 per month, and it does scale. So if you've got a larger company, you have larger needs as far as recruiting, yes, they can scale up from there. But you've done those $1,000 campaigns, and they've been well worth it.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So speak with drivers who are interested in your company, because they're doing targeted ads. They're finding the people who actually would like to drive for you, or somebody like you. So speak with those drivers. Don't waste your time on leads shared with every other carrier near you. So it is time. Chris, I can read. I'm really good. I'm really good at it. It's time
You're
you got
on vacation mode.
You have no idea. It's time you got your trucks out of the yard and onto the road. Grow your fleet. Now, contact Merrimack Solutions today by going to merrimacksolutions.com/hire now. That's MERAMEC, merrimacksolutions.com/hire now, and speak with somebody about how they can help you hire the truckers your business needs. That's merrimacksolutions.com/hire now. Thank you to Merrimack Solutions for sponsoring the Haulin Assets podcast.
And it's really cool kind of how specific they can get to, so you can target who it is you're looking for in a driver, like based on a lot of different factors, and specifically geographically where they're located. So it's not like you're advertising for people all across the country. You can say specifically, I want to be in this city, or there's a lot of cool things.
Yeah, we talk about the data that gets harvested from us on social media, and there's a lot of like nefariousness that goes on, whatever, that makes it kind of creepy. But with stuff like this, and honestly with the advertisements that I get online, I'm thankful that it's targeted to me. Like, I'm glad that I'm getting stuff that I actually care about, and it's not, kids' toy commercials like I used to watch all day in the 90s.
Yeah.
Or something. So, all right, Chris, let's talk spreadsheet results. This is the load analysis that you did. People can go to haulinassetsllc.com, like you said, and look up the actual spreadsheets that you're about to talk about. But why don't you give us some highlights? How did it go?
So I'm going to, I already said this, but I noticed that only 8% of our miles driven are direct shipper loads.
Right.
And we've only been doing outbound stuff, direct shippers. It's pretty rare that we get something inbound. But that's a number that we need to get improved quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk a little bit about that. But I want to get at least 40% of our miles direct from shippers. And
it's at 8%.
And it's at 8% right now. So I mean that'd be 32% more. Yeah, 5 times. And the other thing that's interesting about it is, so let's kind of go back to that other the everybody category, everybody else category. I'm kind of using that as what our average is. And so that other category, everybody else category, our rate per mile, total rate per mile, all in rate per mile was $2.04 a mile. But our direct shipper stuff was 37 cents a mile more than that.
So what, 241? Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's a pretty big change. And if we can get, I calculated some numbers, if we can get 32% more of our miles with direct shippers, where we're getting on average that extra 37 cents a mile, I mean, that's $13,000 a month more in revenue. And that's like gravy on top, because there's no more additional expense that comes with that. We're just better negotiating, better relationships. We're doing a lot of other, we're not having to incur additional expenses to get that additional revenue. And so that would go straight to our bottom line. And obviously that'd make a huge difference.
Yeah. Okay. So more direct shippers. And this is a tune you've been singing for approximately, hang on, carry the one, forever. So this is not a new concept.
Yeah. And we actually, we're actually, in all transparency, recording this episode almost a week sooner than we normally would,
right?
Because Craig thinks he has to go on a vacation.
Something about Craig needs a break too.
Whatever. But anyway, so we're recording this a week earlier, but we've got a load. So today's Wednesday. We've got a load on Friday with a new direct shipper that we're pretty excited about. It's a good paying load. We've been in pretty good contact with them. And I think we're going to probably be able to get more out of these guys.
Nice.
And so, we've been hitting the pavement quite a bit over the last couple months. And hopefully now we're starting to see a little bit of traction. It's usually not super easy to get in with these guys, especially in the kind of market that we're in right now.
Yeah. Okay.
So more to come, more to follow, but that's ultimately that's going to be what really moves the needle the most.
Right.
More of that.
More of the direct shippers. But like you said, that's 8% of what you're doing now. 92% is the rest, as you call it. So what are some pullouts, some highlights from that?
So that's like the low hanging fruit. That's the obvious thing.
Yeah.
The other thing that's really interesting too is when we looked at these brokers, we have a couple. So there's kind of 3 brokers that are pretty solid above that average, and then there's 3 brokers that are solidly below that $2.04 a mile average.
Okay.
And it's really interesting, and I hadn't put two and two together on this, but the one that's better, we're getting a solid 10 cents a mile more out of this broker, and that's even including most of what they do is east to west, which is usually
the less paying
the worst paying loads.
Yeah.
And so if you factor that in, it's really probably even better than 10 cents a mile more. But the funny thing is, so we've only really been doing much of a volume with these guys for about the last 3 or 4 months, this particular brokerage. Guess what increased our volume with these guys?
Truck 11. I don't know.
No, it was, I'm trying to remember what truck it was. It might've been truck. I'm not going to guess. It was an incident in Oklahoma.
Okay. Was it the best hooker in Ogallala?
No. The DUI that we had. So if you remember
I remember this. So as I recall that, there's a big DUI. It was a huge to-do for the company.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it scares the crap out of you as a business owner. But as I recall the story, it actually increased or it bettered your relationship with the broker and maybe even that shipper as well, because you guys handled it so professionally.
Yeah. And so that broker we hadn't done much of a volume with at that point. He saw how we handled that situation, and he's been giving us there are by far our highest volume of loads. I think it's 36 loads that we did for them.
Wow.
Over that 3-month period. And that all came about because of how we handled a really tough situation.
Okay, well, let that be a lesson.
And so, it's kind of nice. We're not only we're getting a good volume of loads from them, but as far as brokered loads go, we're getting, pretty good, it's a pretty good relationship. And so, that's one of the big takeaways that I kind of have got from this. And so what's the kind of big lesson learned from that? And this is something that I've talked a lot about over the years, is we've developed a good relationship with that particular broker and brokerage. Relationships matter. And that's, as I've done some of this analysis, that's one of the things I'm like, okay, we've got to do a little bit better job of building those relationships.
Yeah, it's the old saying, hey, here's my cliche for the day, Chris. It's not what you know, it's who you know, right? But we often use that phrase when it comes to nepotism or something. Oh yeah, great, you got an uncle, that's how you got into this or that industry or whatever. But no, it's this is something that applies across the board in every area of your life. Relationships matter is what that boils down to. Yep. And maintaining them, creating new relationships, it is worth your time. End of story.
Yeah.
Right. Okay,
sure.
Cool. So what other highlights you want to pull out from that?
Another thing that I've found very interesting, and this isn't just from the data on this, but also talking with other people, including, Jake and Brandy, our dispatchers. Mm-hmm. Our top 3 brokers are all brokers that don't have assets. So
don't have assets.
Yeah. So in the trucking world, in the brokerage world, you've got brokerages that have assets, meaning they've got trucks. They've got
they're doing their
fleet.
own. Oh, well, there's a conflict of interest for you.
Yeah. So our top 3 are ones that don't have assets. Our bottom 3, 2 of the bottom 3 are ones that do have assets.
Okay.
They've got their own fleet of trucks. The third one is just a bad company. Like we've had bad experiences with them, not only in Haulin Assets, but they're one of the bigger ones. I'm not going to say their name, even though I really want to. They're one of the bigger ones, and they're notorious for mistreating carriers.
Got it.
And so, anyway, they so the point being is there's that conflict of interest, and brokerages, if they've got assets, they're naturally going to put their best paying loads. They're going to take care of their own trucks first, and everybody else gets the sloppy seconds.
Right, which is 100% written in bold, fully understandable. If I were running their company, that's how I would do it. Of course, that's how it's going to go. It's almost incandescently obvious that that's what they would do. So what do you do about that then? Do you just lean more heavily on your better brokers? Are you going to work your way out of those less lucrative relationships? What are you going to do? So
that's a great question. And I want to kind of caveat this and maybe go on a little bit of a tangent here, because what we've talked about mostly so far is we've looked at things strictly from a numbers and financial standpoint.
Right.
When you pick loads, what you're doing, there's a lot more than just the rate and how much you're going to earn on the load that goes into it. You've got to look at, what market it's going into. Are you going to be able to get a load out of that market? What's going on with the driver? Is the driver in a situation where they're at the end of however long they're going to be out on the road, and that you need to get them something that gets them back home, and it may not be as good of a paying load. There's just a plethora of decision-making factors that go into picking each and every load. Mm. And so it's kind of hard to answer the question of, what's the best, what's the best option in every situation.
It's too multifaceted.
There's so many different variables. And so you kind of have to be careful there.
That being said,
That being said,
What are you going to do, Chris? And I shouldn't say about that specifically. I mean, what are you going to do as far as using this spreadsheet to improve the numbers across the board? What kind of strategies do you have?
so I think what you kind of do in this situation is you take all that into account, and you're not gonna say, hey, I'm never gonna do business again with a asset-based brokerage. You just can't. There's going to be situations where you need to pick up on those loads. But what I think that does is it gives us an idea of where we need to focus our time and energy. We're going to focus those relationships on, we're going to put the non-asset-based brokerages at a higher priority than the asset-based ones, and try to develop those relationships, build those relationships so that they feel comfortable with us, and we're going to get their better paying loads. Kind of like we are getting with the one that I've been talking about. They're giving us their cream of the crop, not because they know that we're going to handle their client well, and we're going to do what it takes to get that load from point A to point B. They feel comfortable with us. And so the better we can build those relationships, the more we can focus on those non-asset based brokerages and build those relationships, the more likely we are to get their better paying loads.
And so if I'm putting myself in other people's shoes here, it's basically, it boils down to, hey, fair is fair. Of course, it's obvious that asset-based brokerage would, give others the sloppy seconds, like you said. Okay, well then those asset-based brokerages are the seconds. Again, turnabout is fair play, right?
Yeah.
They do it to you, you do it to them, and everybody walks away a winner. Hopefully.
Or all losers or something. I don't know.
We all lose equally. Congratulations. Yeah. Anyway, this is all making perfect sense to me, at least in my head.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the changes we're going to make. We're, trying to develop more of those relationships. And so what we're going to do, like Nate and I specifically, and probably, I think I'm going to take really the lead on this, is I'm going to start reaching out to the brokers that we haul loads for, and starting with the asset-based or the non-asset-based ones, and just, do essentially in the military, we call this an after-action review. Anytime you complete a mission or you do something, you do an after-action review where you kind of just dissect a debrief. What went well, what went wrong, what can we do better? What do we want to continue doing that we're doing well? And just kind of, reach out to the broker and just, introduce myself. Hey, we just hauled a load for you. How'd it go for you? What can we do better?
Was it good for you
Was
too?
it good? Yes. It's a family-friendly show, Craig.
That's well, not every week, Chris. Okay, good. So anything else?
We're gonna do some things like that, and just again, focusing hard on direct shipper relationships. And Nate's kind of taking the lead on that one. I'm going to take the lead on the brokerages and developing a little bit better relationships with brokerages. And so what this kind of all boils down to, if we were to give a couple goals that we want to get out of all of this, is get our direct shipper mileage closer to 40% of our total miles.
Right.
And then increase our brokerage rate that we get on average by 10 cents a mile.
Okay. So 10 cents a mile from the brokers, more directs. That makes a lot of sense. Now,
and if we can do all that,
sorry, go on.
I was just gonna say, if we can do all that, I've kind of played around with the numbers a little bit. I think we can get about $25,000 to $30,000 more a month in revenue just from doing those things. And obviously that's not something that's going to happen overnight, but if we can do that, an extra $25,000, $30,000 in revenue with really no additional expenses would be super impactful.
Obviously, especially in the market that we've been dealing with the last year.
And that'll give us some good, consistent profitability.
Yeah. So on the 40% for direct shippers, just so that I can get an idea of the long-term goals, is the long-term goal 40%, or is the long-term goal to get as close as you can reasonably to 100% doing direct shipper loads? Or is that totally unreasonable and 40% is already kind of shooting for the moon a little bit?
I would say it's very reasonable to get to the point where you've essentially got all of your outbound stuff. So pretty close to 50%.
Oh, okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Getting stuff coming back is a little bit more difficult, but that's not impossible either. So even if you could get 50% of your stuff coming back direct, like I think you're killing it at that point. So that essentially be almost like 75% of your loads direct shippers. If you can do that, I think you've got it made. Really good spot.
Okay. All right, cool.
But for now, if we can get that 40 shooting for 50, all our outbound stuff, and then from there kind of start working, trying to find some more back calls that are direct would be good. So
Chris, is this where we start talking about the 7 habits of highly effective people and the sharpening your axe and all that stuff? You know what I'm talking about?
So that's what we're doing, sharpening the axe, man.
Yeah. So as you've been talking about all this, it has made me think of the last 10 to 12 financials episodes that we've done that have been, for the most part, pretty painful.
Lackluster.
Yeah. Lackluster. There you go. And it can be demoralizing. And it's tempting to kind of sit back and just wait until the market gets better. See if can I weather this storm? Well, there are things you can do, right? And as allergic as I am to spreadsheets, I'm still impressed. And I'm glad I get to see kind of what it means to step back, sharpen the axe, and, then get back to work maybe a little smarter than you were before, right?
Yep.
That's the whole point of all this.
That's the whole point. I think doing this kind of being self-reflective and really thinking and analyzing your business on a regular basis is a super healthy thing to do. So and just this kind of load analysis that I've kind of been spending the last week or so, 2 weeks on, is just one of the things that we're trying to do. We're, again, we're making a concerted effort to make some of those, a bunch of those small incremental changes that on an aggregate will become a big change and have a big impact on the business. It's not one thing, it's a lot of little things.
Yep.
We're just going to keep doing that.
We talk about fuel expenses and mileage, and it's like, hey, can you add this to your truck? Hey, you'll spend a little bit, but over the long term, it's going to increase your mileage and therefore your profitability. But you're going to find 50 of those little things to do to your truck. It's not one fix-all solution, right? And this is the same kind of thing, streamlining the company, so to speak.
Exactly.
So, okay, Chris, any final thoughts before we head out for today?
I think that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chris, for coming in a week early so that I can go on my
adventure.
I was about to
vacation.
say. I was about to say well deserved.
I'm giving you a hard time because it is a little bit of there's some work involved.
There is a little bit. Yeah, I guess so. But I needed to go out early. So thank you for recording a little bit early. Thanks everybody for listening. And thanks Merrimack for sponsoring the show again this week. All right, Chris, I will see you next time.
See you, Craig.